sometimes investing is complex and sometimes it's simple. In this case, I think it's relatively simple, right? Bitcoin's price is set by supply and demand. We have a massive new source of demand. And in April, we're going to have reduced new supply. And sometimes that simple math is all that you need. So I think the market is still underestimating the importance of these ETFs. They haven't unlocked the full spectrum of potential investors into the space.
Welcome, everybody. Happy Monday. Excited to be back on the air as we are seeing Ethereum top $3,100 right now. It's the largest amount we've seen Ethereum trade for since before the Terra collapse. We're continuing to watch that number climb and climb the longer we keep doing this, and a lot of headlines to get into today as we watch where Ethereum goes. I'm, of course, the host of Coinage alongside our head writer, Andre Bagansky, here in studio.
How's it going, Zach?
GM's going well.
GM, Ethereum on the way up, huh? 7%
Ethereum on the way
week.
up. There's a lot going on there. Obviously, it's ETH Denver this week. We're going to have a look ahead to what's coming up in Denver.
We'll be in Denver, too.
We'll be traveling very shortly, actually, to get out there. But a lot to catch up on, Andre, and a lot to look ahead to. Of course, we're also going to be chatting with Bitwise's CIO, Matt Hogan, going to be joining the show, chatting all things Bitcoin ETF, all things potentially Ethereum ETF. Big Ethereum theme, actually.
Yeah, as Bitcoin takes a breather, Ethereum pulls ahead, sort of like a wider market rally. But yeah, we're going to dig into Ethereum at 3,000. We're going to talk a little bit about Reddit as well. Kraken trying to shake off the SEC. Obviously, some news regarding Worldcoin's continuous climb, and also some involving Uniswap. And then finally, we're going to dig in a little bit about Trump and statements that he made recently about Bitcoin, kind of changing up his stance, Zach.
Yeah, and it's obviously we've called 2024 the year of the Bitcoin election before, and I think we're going to continue to pay attention to what all the candidates have to say about it. But today, Andre, as we mentioned, we're starting with Ethereum because it's what everyone's watching right now, and a lot of, I guess, technical things to get into, but a lot of non-technical things to get into as well. And we'll start with this all-time high that we are potentially seeing broken, if you believe what analysts are saying right now. And I think it's pretty interesting. You and I maybe agree about this. We don't normally take a technical look at Ethereum or any of the things that we really cover on this show. We normally take a little bit of a fundamental approach in looking at some of these things. But right now, we'll start with this. And I don't know if we have the chart here, Texas, but when we're looking at Ethereum on a technical lens, right? This is the headline out from Kraken OTC, a new note that CoinDesk wrote up, that it's technically setting up for 5,200 in this little ascending triangle chart, if you look at it. It's a pretty bullish setup, is what they're saying here, Andre, if you look at that chart. And 5,200 wouldn't be crazy to see relative to the other price calls that we've seen. But that is what the technical analysts over at Kraken OTC are saying is coming next.
Yeah, I am by no means a chart wizard, but essentially, like with an ascending triangle, they're saying that at Kraken OTC that Ethereum has found a path toward 5,200. Essentially, that bulls at 3,000 have pushed through a long-standing resistance, and now that they do have some control over the market, if you do look at Ethereum, it's at its highest price in 22 months. The 3,000 mark, Ethereum hit it just before Terra collapse, which, as we all know, really tanked the crypto market, right? But, in terms of an all-time high being imminent, I mean, Ethereum still has a long way to go. Its all-time high of 49,000 is definitely not a given.
Yeah, we're like 50% off. I mean, I don't think that that's crazy to suspect either.
Yep. And I mean, if you look at Kraken OTC, bulls will be bulls. I went into some of the data, though, to look at the active Ethereum addresses, because this is something that really stood out to me. This idea that maybe the market cap of Ethereum has returned. But in terms of the overall health of Ethereum, in terms of how we measure it, like active addresses is a really good barometer for just activity on the network. And in April 2022, we had 1.9 million active Ethereum addresses in terms of a 30-day moving average. We're still at 200,000 less, Zach, meaning that, in terms of Ethereum, that main network, less activity overall. Obviously, the metric doesn't account for L2s, which have just like blown up over the past, since this in terms of their popularity.
Yeah, but call me rational, but I actually like that as a stat to watch, maybe more than this ascending triangle call. And, if you put them together, you might say, doesn't really matter how you get there as long as you get there and there are a lot of people who are on the same page. I mean, we had Fundstrat on the show also calling for an all-time high on Ethereum as well, which would put us, basically in the same range that the technical analysts here are calling for. But you're right. I mean, I don't know if the addresses not being there, like you said, if you added in maybe layer 2s or the excitement around layer 2s as well as maybe some of the old L1 Ethereum active addresses, you'd probably get there. Get close.
It would probably blow it away, honestly. Yeah. But, in terms of Ethereum, it's a novel moment right now for this, because you do have this ETF narrative that everybody has been fixated on. Are we going to have an ETF? Are we not going to have an ETF? But at the same time, we do have the Dencun upgrade, which just got its official date for March 13th, which, is supposed to make layer 2 networks cheaper and more viable to use with the introduction of a feature called proto-dank sharding. Something I'm looking into digging with Matt Hogan on the show later is this idea between what's really driving Ethereum's price right now. Is it sort of speculation around whether an ETF is going to get approved? Is it a recognition in terms of how this Dencun upgrade is supposed to benefit the network?
Yeah.
But, we'll be in ETH Denver this week, so maybe we can get to the bottom of that while we're out there. I don't know.
I think we will. We obviously chatted with Hester Peirce. She's one of the, the SEC commissioners. We had her on Coinage not too long ago, chatted with her about her thoughts around Ethereum ETFs and what those might look like. But last week, the CEO of Grayscale, Michael Sonnenschein, was on CNBC talking about his expectations around an Ethereum ETF. And I just want to play a little clip from that interview, because if you listen to it, he was echoing, Andre, exactly what he said about Bitcoin ETFs, which I think is pretty interesting in terms of the confidence level of where we're at. It's not a matter of when, it's a matter of when, not a matter of if, which we've heard from him before. And then weeks later, the Bitcoin ETFs got approved. So just take a listen to what Michael Sonnenschein had to say on CNBC.
An spot Ethereum ETF is a matter of when, not a matter of if. And
you say that because, with such confidence?
I say that with confidence because my team has been doing the tough work to move this industry forward, work constructively with regulators, focus on disclosure, investor protections, and that's been true for Bitcoin. Proud of the work we did with GBTC, and now.
Do you think? Look, it took a lawsuit to get Gary Gensler to back down on this, right? I mean, and we just had Gary here recently, and you saw that interview. I'd love to get your reaction to it. But clearly, left to his own devices, this is not the outcome that he would have preferred. I think that's, at least in between the lines, that's what I think he has said.
Well, he actually wrote a pretty strong dissenting letter around this and really focused on the Grayscale lawsuit the day that the approvals for spot Bitcoin ETFs came out.
And so, which then begs the question, on the Ethereum front, if that is to move forward in a meaningful way, does that require another suit?
It's too early to say. It's too early to say. I think we have a similar dynamic in the market where the SEC has allowed for and approved Ethereum futures ETFs to come to market. The data suggests in a very similar way to Bitcoin that spot Bitcoin and Bitcoin futures have an inextricable tie. The markets have a 99.9% correlation. Same is true around Ethereum. And so we do have a very similar dynamic here.
Too early to say, Andre. Too early to say. And I honestly feel like, obviously everyone's watching the May deadline for when these basically have to be approved unless the SEC wants to go full nuclear mode and invite another lawsuit, I suppose. But how early is too early to say? I feel like we're there now where we should be getting some of the signal that the ball's moving forward. And I don't know if I've seen enough yet.
I mean, I don't know if, I guess we're all in the same camp as Sonnenschein, where it is like we don't know whether or not the Grayscale or some asset manager is going to have to sue the SEC in order to get these through the court. But if it does come to that, I do almost feel like there is a greater chance of that happening, just because we saw it play out with Bitcoin ETFs, where those lawsuits really were pivotal in terms of getting those products approved. Yeah. But, as you mentioned, Hester Peirce was on the show and she said, I hope we learn our lessons from that. So too early to tell.
It's unclear if any lessons have been learned, but I know that you're also been watching. We talk so much about Bitcoin, obviously, but Ethereum, not to be overshadowed, as we open the show with it today. And both, actually, here's a segue for you, both on the sheets at Reddit, assets that are being held by that company as they look to file their IPO.
And a little bit of Polygon, a little bit of Matic. They'll say that, and even though it's an immaterial worth. Let's see if we can get that graphic up on the screen. And in terms of Reddit wanting to file for an IPO, trying to go public, I mean, really interesting to see a social media platform going public in 2024, Zach, sort of disclosing in its sort of IPO filings on Thursday that it did hold Bitcoin and Ether that it had purchased with excess cash. Now, it didn't disclose how much of these cryptocurrencies it holds per se, and sort of said the carrying value, the net carrying value of these digital assets was immaterial. But I do think it's potentially a theme setter for the rest of 2024, where as excitement returns to cryptocurrency markets in general, like it would make sense that more publicly traded companies, or in this case, a company that's looking to go public, do sort of cozy up to crypto as that sort of heat returns, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I see you've also flagged the Reddit NFTs in his example, and it has kind of been like one of the shining examples, I think, in the broader tech space of a tech company really trying to integrate crypto in a way that made sense. I know that they like kind of inched a little bit away from it in terms of maybe some of the elements that Reddit was trying to include there when it comes to not just NFTs, but also kind of token and mod incentives. But in general, though, I mean, Alexis Ohanian, obviously, his VC firm very firmly still in Web3 and very firmly in crypto. So maybe not too surprising that, you know, they would put crypto at the forefront of their plans to go public.
Yeah, real quickly, I mean, I pulled up some stats regarding these NFTs that they have on Polygon, these collectible avatars, as they're so called, you know, just stats that we ended up pulling up from Dune. And I mean, 30 million collectible avatars that have been held by Reddit users is no trivial metric by any measure, in my opinion. And, you know, one of the things that's interesting about this sort of integration is this idea that if you want to play around with collectible avatars and you do want to end up like trading them or collecting them, like you can go as deep as you want into that. But at the same time, like if you don't want to, you don't have to worry about it. It's not like you have to like use a token to comment or anything like that. So for me, it has been a sort of one of those success stories in terms of taking avatars and taking NFTs and integrating them into an existing business model in a way that's like not just gonna like make people cringe, if you will.
That's always the hardest part, to be honest. And like you said, I mean, a lot of theirs being built on Polygon is another interesting. We're gonna be chatting with Trump. His NFTs were also on Polygon, the Trump trading cards. So I guess there is overlap there in terms of both of them.
And just real quickly, I want to put a pin in this. When Reddit introduced their NFT avatars, a lot of people don't realize that they turned their mobile app into a digital wallet. Essentially like turning the Reddit mobile app on people's phones into a digital wallet, in the sense that you could collect these avatars then. I mean, in terms of just like spurring overall adoption, kind of like an overnight stroke of the pen that really gets all that out there. So kind of interesting.
To bring in 40 million too.
In terms of like earnings and Wall Street and publicly traded companies, we did see one company benefit last week from its proximity to crypto, and that would be Jack Dorsey's Block, which saw total customer sales of 2.5 billion worth of Bitcoin in Q4, which is up 37% year over year. I mean, the stock is up 18% over the past week to $79. Obviously, much of that, the lion's share of that, happening after they sort of disclosed earnings on Thursday. But it's another example of just like, you know, crypto players on Wall Street benefiting from their association to crypto. Block also disclosed that it holds about 8,000 Bitcoin right now, which is, you know, less than the 9,720 that Tesla still holds in terms of their Bitcoin balance sheet, but significant nonetheless. You know, for people who don't know, Cash App being a big part of Block's business, profited 66 million from Bitcoin sales in Q4. So Jack Dorsey quietly, consistently, just kind of like chugging along on that front in terms of the Wall Street front. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was down in the Congressional Hispanic Caucus with a member of the Block team on the panel, and just hearing how kind of dedicated they are to that piece of the business. It's remained unshaken, perhaps unsurprisingly. Jack Dorsey, of course, wearing the Satoshi, the Bitcoin sweater at the Super Bowl. People, you know, as we talked about on the show before, you know, that man is in it to win it when it comes to sticking with crypto. And I think, you know, it's a theme that we've talked about this year. I'm waiting to see which new company will enter into making it an emphasis too, especially probably the safest bet's going to be some fintech company, I would suspect, who's seeing what Block's doing and saying, okay, why don't we do some of that too? But perhaps maybe there is hesitancy around it all, Andre, until we get more answers. And legal answers, that is, because we're continuing to see even the people who have embraced crypto, Coinbase included, Kraken included, they continue to battle the SEC. And I think that that's one of the lawsuits. You know, we talk so much about Coinbase. We don't talk so much about the Kraken SEC lawsuit that is now, I think, more and more getting attention today.
Yes, I mean, when you look at Kraken last week, they ended up filing a motion to dismiss the lawsuit that the SEC brought against them. And it may sound familiar because the SEC or Kraken has already settled with the SEC. They settled in February of 2023. The company settled with the SEC over their staking feature, which essentially, without admitting admitting to or denying the allegations, they agreed to sort of end their staking problem. And then they were hit with another lawsuit later on, much in the same vein of Coinbase and Binance, where the SEC is going after these companies and sort of saying like, hey, you're essentially operating as a traditional securities exchange, broker and dealer and clearinghouse, and you didn't register with our agency, and now you are in trouble. But, you know, Kraken, what was significant about the comments that they sort of had in dismissing this lawsuit is they're saying that the SEC is a politically compromised agency, and they really did raise issues with the fact that they were hit or made aware of this lawsuit a day after their chief legal officer, Marco Santori, testified about SEC overreach in front of Congress in May.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's one of those things where no one really knows where these SEC suits are going to go. But I do think it is interesting to see some of the action. And a lot of people have been talking about people leaving the SEC in the wake of all of these things, in the wake of maybe how the Bitcoin ETF approvals went and how the Ethereum ETF approvals or not yet approvals have been going. And a lot of people are talking about Leighton Stewart, who led the SEC's crypto unit, piecing out. Not just piecing out and resigning. We have this tweet up, Texas, but also kind of basically saying on his way out the door that crypto's here to stay. And I think it's one of those things, and by he, I mean she, it's a woman, Leighton Stewart, that crypto is here to stay, Andre. And I feel like that's a big thing. If you're leaving the SEC and you're saying on the way out the door is that, look, no matter how hard we want to battle this, it's still going to be here long after I leave the SEC and long after probably Gary Gensler leaves.
Yeah, and that really is the in between the lines story that's going on right now for me, which is like, you know, we highlighted this Kraken story, which is a very routine sort of development in their lawsuit. But at the same time, you did sort of have this departure, which for people who are following crypto, like kind of surprising to see her on the way out, especially sort of like say that crypto is here to stay, as you just mentioned, sort of recognizing the staying power of Bitcoin as an asset class. You know, and I just to recap, like the SEC is fighting like in a lot of different courts in a lot of different districts. You have this Kraken lawsuit, which is playing out in the Northern District of California. You have this Binance lawsuit, which is playing out against in a DC district court. You have the Coinbase and Terraform Labs lawsuits, which await decision in New York's Southern District of New York Court. And, you know, a proactive lawsuit against the SEC was filed yesterday in federal court by a group of crypto firms in Texas, which is seen as sort of a friendlier jurisdiction in terms of being anti-SEC. And, you know, you look at all these cases, they all hinge on whether or not like cryptocurrency should be considered a security and a commodity. And there's people out there that say, you know, the only reason or the only way you're going to get true clarity on this matter is by passing regulation, which as we enter an election year, seems less and less likely, Zach.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Obviously, it's not just that, but also how hard the industry wants to battle back. We had Perry-Ann Boring from the Chamber of Digital Commerce on the show 2 weeks ago. She had hinted that they might take legal action and sue to prevent the EIA kind of Bitcoin mining stuff. They did that. So, I mean, it's both sides having their own lawsuits, and they continue to play out until, I think you're right, until there are some answers here. And in the meantime, you got people who are just continuing to test the idea of how much can we promise and how much can people speculate without their heads exploding. Mm-hmm. And
when it comes to stuff like Nvidia and AI, there is no end.
There is no end. But yes, that's the other one that a lot of people are continuing to talk about. Worldcoin. Andre, we even talked about this a little bit last week and how big and how fervent this rally has been. been, and it is pretty nuts. If you look at the chart, just bringing it up here, Worldcoin now north of $8, and it was, I think, just as recent as the beginning of the month, down at like 2. So the rally has been fierce. The speculation has been fierce since Sam Altman's basically Sora launched, in the way that we were looking at how important AI video generation might be. And a lot of that excitement, as we talked about last week, spills over into Worldcoin. But more and more people are saying this isn't going to end well. You had the co-founder over at Blockworks talking about how this is going to, quote, end in tears. I don't know what your take is on this, but I think a lot of people are trying to look at that chart and say, what the hell's going on?
Well, I think there's a bunch of different ways that you can explain this in terms of like, what is WorldCoin doing? Like, if you take a step back and you look at it in like a very like sort of just like logical sense, like, oh, like AI is here, weapon of mass creation. We need digital scarcity, digital identity. Like, that makes sense in terms of preventing people or allowing people to preserve their identity in some ways. But we talked about the release of Sora as being something that sort of sent WorldCoin spiraling upwards, if you will. And, we had Nvidia report earnings last week, which is almost like these two things where it's like not directly attached to WorldCoin per se, but definitely like shedding some sort of hype on it. For those that don't know, like Nvidia reported earnings last week and it added 277 billion in terms of its market capitalization in terms of a single trading day, which is a record, Zach.
Yeah.
And to put things into perspectives, I know this is apples and oranges, but like WorldCoin like surging is a big narrative. I mean, it's at 1.1 billion right now. So just different in terms of the scale, but yes, up 400% over the past year and 45% in the past month.
And it's weird because WorldCoin is arguably less of an AI play than some of the other things that also did move. I think it's fascinating to watch all the AI levered crypto projects pump when Nvidia also pumps. And it was the same thing. Akash, another one potentially here in the decentralized cloud space. Render, we've talked about a number of times. These literally traded basically 2x the move that we saw in Nvidia because people believe that these projects are just a bet on the AI decentralized cloud computing space. And we've covered why, but I think it's fascinating to kind of watch that all play out. People say crypto is not based on fundamentals, but the narrative certainly does matter in kind of where these things go.
Yeah, and I've seen some reporting out there that indicates traders may be treating WorldCoin almost like as a stand-in for OpenAI's stock in some sense, because it's not a publicly traded company, even though the only linking factor that they have is Sam Altman and his leadership in both projects. So, yeah. But in terms of other tokens that are in the air this week, we've also got Uniswap, which is up 60%, or more than that, it seems at this point. It surged on the introduction of a proposal, Zach, that allows the fees from this decentralized exchange to be distributed to people who stake their Uniswap tokens, which, turns out the market thinks that's a big deal, Zach. It went from $7 to $12.75 over the course of just 5 hours, and it's up 80% over the past month to $10.55 as of this writing.
As a founder, Andre, I have a project that really does open the pathway for our NFT holders to unlock patronage dividends, right? And kind of more and more being attached to true ownership. People talk about governance tokens all the time, and people always ask, well, what does this actually get me? I can vote on things, but what do I get in return other than just speculation on number go up? And I think that that's kind of what a lot of these holders, investors, fans of these projects are yearning for, is how do I actually get more concrete upside in these projects? That's why Coinage exists in the way that we do. And I think it is pretty awesome to actually see the way that the market moves on some of this more concrete, rather than just, hold on to our governance token and expect the price to go up. But like, yes, if you start unlocking revenue generation in the form of dividends, profit sharing, whatever it may be, I think it is pretty fascinating. And obviously it's tricky and hard to do depending on which jurisdiction you're in. And Uniswap probably taking a risk here in the way that they're setting this up, and TBD on what other lawsuits might come from it. But, shout out to any project founder out there who's really trying to figure out a way to give value back to the people who have made you what you are.
Well, 1.1 billion in terms of trading volume is nothing to shake a stick at in terms of the potential revenue that can be redistributed to those Uniswap stakers and Uniswap holders. And at the same time, it really is like a community-led initiative. For me, I wonder like what sort of knock-on effects does this sort of measure or sort of initiative have in the bull market as as trading volumes in theory, return back to decentralized exchanges. Will people just go somewhere else if it is less efficient, or they're able to pay less in terms of the overall fees?
Sure. Or I mean, honestly, just more pressure that maybe some other projects that aren't leaning into this might face, right? And you saw it in the NFT space already, whether it's Blur and everything else around airdrops and OpenSea, and the quick loss that they suffered when it came to not leaning into that. I mean, for other DeFi projects out there, if Uniswap's going this way, it's kind of playing catch up now for them, I think, a little bit. But it's exciting to see. And to wrap up, we've only got one more thing on the rundown today, Andre. And then we're going to be chatting with Bitwise's CIO, Matt Hogan, who will be joining us in just a sec. But to wrap up, because you mentioned kind of where we're at this year and politics being such a big thing, we'd be remiss if we didn't highlight, since the last time we saw you, what former President Donald Trump had said about Bitcoin, a question that I think a lot of candidates will continue to get asked. And it kind of got a bit of a no answer, non-answer here in terms of Laura Ingraham asking him about Bitcoin and how Trump, well, never mind. I'm not going to describe it. We're just going to play what he said and then chat about it on the other side.
I think first we have to sort of
you want
contextualize
context?
The question. Yeah,
the people want context.
It's this idea that like, Trump was asked during this town hall by Laura Ingraham that like Bitcoin, given that it's decentralized, the government can't get its hand on it, and all the young people who are particularly interested in it, like, isn't it sort of worth embracing it for him? And this is his response.
Yeah, play the clip, Texas.
Well, a lot of people are doing it. I always liked one currency. I call it a currency. I like the dollar, but a lot of people are doing it, and frankly, it's taken a life of its own. You probably have to do some regulation, as you know, but many people are embracing it, and more I'm seeing people wanting to pay Bitcoin. And you're seeing something that's interesting. So I can live with it one way or the other. I've always liked one really powerful thing, and that's called the dollar.
All right, so there you go.
Where is he seeing that demand in terms of people using Bitcoin as a vehicle, Zach, do you think?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, again,
maybe donations? Maybe he's talking about like, because
he met Milei, by the way. He's talking to Argentina's president. Maybe perhaps they were talking about some of the payments because the Lightning Network's more used, as we know, probably outside the U.S. than anywhere here. But I don't know. It was a non-answer for me, and I think a lot of people were like, what does that even mean? That like more people are using it, and I'm fine with it, but I also love the dollar because his stance has evolved. It's everything. It's like everywhere, and every piece of it has changed. I mean, and now he's got NFTs, so it's hard to track.
In 2021, yeah, that's a really good point. In 2021, he did also say it just seems like a scam. You know, which is a pretty big jump in terms of where he's come from. And there definitely are people out there that would attribute that to Vivek Ramaswamy, who was banging the Bitcoin drum and saying, I'm going to end the Fed. And, after dropping out, he sort of throws his weight behind Donald Trump. And you are seeing that now reflected in that platform. And it's sort of, there's this idea lingering in my head where it's like, does the crypto voter actually exist? Is there someone who's going to be motivated to go to the polls and actually be like, I'm going to vote on this in terms of like a turning issue?
If you listen to crypto Twitter, the answer is definitely yes, Andre, in terms of who's most vocal about it. But tweeting about something and actually going to the polls and voting, I understand, are two very different things. But it is kind of interesting to see what's shaping up in Massachusetts because Senator Elizabeth Warren, of course, in her anti-crypto army, being challenged by John Deaton in your state.
Yeah, my home state.
In your home state.
Yes.
And so,
don't live in Massachusetts anymore.
No, he's out here in Brooklyn now. But yeah, no, I think that it's an interesting kind of battle, and we'll see how much money attention that challenge gets. She's obviously very high profile. If John Deaton can pull off a miracle.
I actually called some people in Massachusetts about that. I asked, like, what do you think of John Deaton? And you know what people asked? Who's John Deaton?
It's early. You got to give him a chance, Andre. These things take time. But in general, we're increasingly whittling the crowd of candidates down. Still a lot of question marks around this election. Obviously, anything can happen when you're dealing with the candidates we have on stage right now. And so TBD on maybe how these stances continue to evolve, but nonetheless,
that
I
might
think
be something to ask people in East Denver. I'm just thinking about it right now, right? You think of it as a very liberal sort of place, like, maybe it's worth asking people, like, what do you think of this, these Republican boosters who are constantly just like talking about Bitcoin? And I don't know.
Again, I think the whole nation right now is waking up and evolving. It's not just these candidates. It's literally everyone who's one point maybe in their life had a stance on Bitcoin, and now you're like, wait a minute, maybe I was wrong. And that's always a weird time to be in, but an exciting time to be in, really, as honestly we continue to see people maybe start to think about Bitcoin and allocating to it in a very different lens. And maybe that's a perfect segue, by the way, into welcoming our guest on the show today. We got Matt Hogan here, Bitwise's CIO, joining us on Coinage. Matt, thank you so much for coming on, man. It's been a while. I haven't seen you in forever.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. And yeah, perfect segue. The mainstreaming of Bitcoin exposure. It's a beautiful morning.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because you guys, I think, have kind of surprised everybody out there with Bitwise's Bitcoin ETF and continues to shine, playing up there with some of the largest asset managers in the world, up there with BlackRock and Fidelity. And I guess, Matt, just how has it been relative to what even your wildest expectations may have been, right? Because everyone was out there saying this is going to take a long time. And now we're a bit over a month into this, and it's pretty wild. Just put it into context for us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's completely off the hook. I mean, I spent 15 years in the ETF industry. I was the CEO of ETF.com. I've seen 5,000 ETF launches. This is the largest ETF launch in history. If you aggregate up the net flows, it's going to blow past the year one record for flows, which was just $5 billion. We're already there, and we're 6 weeks in. I think these ETFs are being bought by everyone. I think they're being bought by retail investors. I think they're being bought by hedge funds. I think they're starting to be bought by institutions and financial advisors. It is a game-changing launch. I think it's going to change the trajectory of Bitcoin. It makes me really excited.
Yeah, and one of those, I mean, this was just out pretty recently, but Carson I'll give them a shout out in terms of when we're trying to watch where all of these fund managers, allocation, where these financial advisors are looking to give their clients access to Bitcoin. Carson, huge. They got 30 billion in assets on their platform, and they tapped 4 of the new Bitcoin ETFs, Bitwise included. I'm curious, like, how big the impact you're expecting to see in the weeks, months to come when it comes to advisors now finally getting their hands on these things, understanding these things, and putting them in front of clients. What are you expecting to see?
I think it's massive. It's going to accelerate over the course of the next year. But just to put it in context, the U.S. wealth market is really 3 groups. There's retail self-directed investors, people managing their own accounts. There are financial advisors who manage money for others, and there are institutions. If you look at the percentages, wealth is about 20% in self-directed, 40% in institutional, and 40% in the advisor space. In other words, this advisor space that we're just unlocking with things like this Carson Group approval is 2 times the size of the investor base that took Bitcoin from $0 to $50,000. I think once you see these people invest, and they're going to invest 1% to 3% of their portfolio, hold that for the long term, reinvest every year, there's just not enough Bitcoin. There's not going to be enough Bitcoin. So I think it'll be very positive for prices. I think it will be $1 billion of inflows. And I think the pace of flows will actually accelerate once we get into April and May. I think you'll see more money coming into these ETFs even than is coming in today.
Matt, I find it really interesting that you sort of say that flows are reaccelerating or will reaccelerate, because it feels like we're actually in the midst of that moment, if you will. Like, we saw these ETFs get approved and people were excited, but sort of in light of the GBTC outflows, I do think some of the enthusiasm went down, and you did see some of those daily inflow numbers start to tick down a little bit. But now it feels like they're really taking off, and I'm curious, like, what do you think is driving that reacceleration that we're currently seeing in terms of these inflows?
Absolutely. Yeah, there are 2 factors. So one is these approvals. Carson has been very public, and kudos to them. They want to show their clients that they're on the forefront of evaluating these new items. But there are many Carsons and mini Carsons behind them that have been approving these ETFs. And so part of the reacceleration we're seeing, and you're right, we're already seeing it, is from those platform approvals and those advisors making their allocations. Of course, we'd be wrong to note there's also an element of reflexivity here. As the price goes up, people who are thinking about these ETFs accelerate their thinking. If it was on your docket to review these ETFs, decide if you want to allocate, investigate the custodians and how they trade, you might have planned to take 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. But as you see Bitcoin, recover from the post ETF launch dip and start to move towards new all-time highs, you're accelerated in doing that. You feel the pressure. And so I think there's that element of reflexivity. And if prices continue to stay here or even go higher, that's going to build on itself for a while. So I think those are the two factors. And I don't see either of them slowing down.
Yeah, I think, one of those things around how do you differentiate, a lot of people have made this into a bit of a competition, whether it's fees, whether it's branding, whether it's, the great commercial you guys put out with the most interesting man in the world. I mean, there's a lot of things to attract attention. What do you see as maybe the most important thing when you look at the opportunities between retail institutions and maybe as we look ahead, what comes next? If all of this competition was around Bitcoin, Ethereum sitting there and people are looking ahead to May potentially. I mean, what do you think is kind of the most interesting thing maybe our viewers don't see behind the scenes when you're operating a company like Bitwise?
Yeah, we're trying to fight against some of the largest asset managers in the world, right? BlackRock is enormous, Fidelity is enormous. And so we try to stack some advantages. When I look at our products, there are three that jump out to me. One, we're 20% cheaper than the BlackRock and Fidelity products, and that is pretty attractive for people. Two, we're crypto specialists. We've been doing this for 7 years, so we know how to trade Bitcoin. We know how to source Bitcoin, and you can see that in the fact that we track very closely to our net asset value, better than many of our competitors, and also that people can call us and get full understanding of what's going on in the market. Advisors want someone they can count on. And Bitwise has 60 plus people who live, sleep, and breathe Bitcoin and crypto 24/7, 365. And so people like that a lot. Another thing that Bitwise has done is we've really aligned ourselves with the Bitcoin community. So we're the only ETF that publishes our Bitcoin address. So you can check for yourself that we own the Bitcoin that we say we do. We donate 10% of the gross profits of the ETF back to Bitcoin core developers. And so I think people who care about Bitcoin are migrating into the Bitwise product as well. But this is a big market. There will be people who would prefer the giant brand of BlackRock, and that's fine. That's growing the pie for Bitcoin. There will be people who prefer the specialist expertise of Bitwise, and we're really excited to be over $1 billion. And yeah, absolutely, there are what's next. There are new products. People are talking about Ethereum. There's a lot more you can do just with Bitcoin. So you should expect to see some fun things coming out of Bitwise and others in the next 6 months.
I think those donations to core developers is something that really stood out to me as the Cointucky Derby, as they were calling it, was getting underway. It really it looks like the company is sort of angling itself, as you mentioned, being that crypto native expert, and also like with posting that address publicly, like really being values based is how it appears to me. And people are excited about the Ethereum ETF, so of course we're going to ask about that in a little bit, whether it's the technical fundamentals of Dencun coming up sort of driving that appreciation versus sort of an ETF play, if you will. But there's something that you ended up saying after Coinbase's earnings came out that really struck me, because it was something that I was like, okay, maybe I don't have the full picture here, but you essentially said that like people are sort of sleeping on Coinbase as a payments company in some ways. I think we have the tweet that we can end up showing up, but sort of like leaning into this idea that like, yes, like during the bull market, trading was huge. It was most of Coinbase's revenues, but now with Base and USDC, they could be making a payments play. I would love to hear you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone has Coinbase wrong, right? Because historically it's been transaction focused. That's how they model it into the future. And that makes people not particularly optimistic, because they assume trading commissions will come in and volume will migrate to other exchanges. And that's probably true. But what I see is a company that's sort of taking this incredible anchor position, right? A dominant position in this rising industry, and finding new ways to do that. It's sometimes right there in the text. No one talked about it post earnings, but literally the second thing they said was they were focusing on payments as one of their top 3 priorities in 2024. And what could that mean? Like you mentioned, it means the combination of Base and USDC disrupting the way payments are made in America and around the world. I think there's a huge tailwind behind stablecoins in general in the US. I actually think there's a chance we'll see a stablecoin bill through Congress. There's sort of bipartisan consensus that we want to be the home of stablecoins that's really emerged over the last year. And if you think about the margin that exists in the payments world, right, we're all paying 2.5% fees on every transaction just to process them. I think Coinbase is going to take a real cut at that. Again, they've been saying, we need to reinvent the system. It's literally their advertising campaign. Now it's the number 2 thing in their top 3 priorities. I think they're serious about it, and I think they're a great company that's going to execute. And I think the way we pay for things is going to change over the next 2 years. So it makes me really excited about the company.
Yeah, I think in terms of Base being something that if you have USDC, I believe you can send people USDC with no transactions associated with that. And I think it's a big step forward in terms of just democratizing payments and making it cheap for people. I almost wonder sometimes though, whether or not the self-custodial elements, like having a self-custody wallet with USDC, payments, everybody likes cheap payments, but also this idea that, I think there might be some rounded edges that are needed in order for that sort of payment stablecoins as a payments mechanism to really take off into the mainstream. But you're already sort of seeing that with companies like PayPal sort of jumping in or at least trying to experiment with it. But I want to get back to the Ethereum ETF sort of question. Another thing that I'm pulling just from your timeline is this idea that as Ethereum breaks the $3,000 mark, is it more of an ETF play in your opinion, or are people just sort of waking up to the values that Dencun is going to bring to the ecosystem?
I think it's the latter. Look, I'm excited about an ETF. I think there's a below 50% chance we get it in May and a well north of that we get it this year. I think that will be a good thing. But I think people are just sleeping on the importance of this upgrade. If you think about what Ethereum is at its core, it's a globally decentralized computer. And the price to use that computer has already fallen by 90% with the rise of layer 2s. And it's going to fall another 90% with the launch of this upgrade. And that's going to create this sort of broadband era of throughput in the Ethereum ecosystem that I think will lead to an enormous flowering of mainstream applications. I spend all my day talking to people, to financial advisors and others who think about crypto occasionally. And one of the questions they ask is, where are the mainstream applications? Where are the applications we use every day? Well, if you go back a few years, right, we were paying a few dollars to $50 to do a transaction on Ethereum. You can't build mainstream applications if the cost to transact ranges from $1 to $50. But if the cost is reliably a penny or sub a penny, you can do so many exciting things. And that's what I think we're going to get after this upgrade. So I think that's the primary driver. And I think people are missing its importance by a factor of 2 or 3 or more. I really think it's a massive deal. The ETF will be a nice accelerant, don't get me wrong, but it's not as big as this upgrade. I think this upgrade is a game changer that unleashes the mainstream era of ETH.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ETF's interesting just because of kind of the moves that we've seen post ETF approval for Bitcoin and kind of that rally. It's an easy thing to understand. As you know, as the former man running the show at ETF.com, these things matter in terms of fund flows. You're seeing that now. But for Ethereum, I guess, we had Hester Peirce on the show, and I couldn't get any more info around. You said sub 50%. I'm in both camps. I think it's a coin flip. But, I mean, help me understand the marginal things we should be watching for in terms of any sort of signal, because, Grayscale CEO Michael Sonnenschein was saying it's a matter of, when, not if, but that when is May. And I'm really struggling to get any sense of anything here, man. I mean, how are you looking at it?
Yeah, Bitcoin was a matter of when, not if, and we waited 10 years for that. So, you have to be careful with that. I like Michael. He's a great guy. I think what the signals you'll see is you'll see increased activity of companies meeting with the staff, and then you'll see filing updates. If you think back to the run up to the spot Bitcoin ETF, there were really sort of 3 signals that it was going to happen. 1, price went up. That was actually a live signal that it was going to happen. The second was you started to see BlackRock and others having discussions with the SEC, and those notes are published publicly, and you want to see that around Ethereum as an indication that there are high level conversations going on. And then as we got very close to launch, you started seeing rapid updates in filings, and those are sort of the three things I would look for as you view this. I think inside the crypto industry, we don't exactly know how it will go with Ethereum at this point. I think people are optimistic on a 1 year time horizon, but the first deadline the SEC has to decide is in May. And I think you're right to think of it as a coin flip. We just don't have many sort of indicia of what's going on or how close we are on getting there. But that's what I would look at.
I feel like it's interesting just to think about, the fact that it did take a grayscale lawsuit to kind of get the SEC to change its mind, right, in the way that ruling went. And I think, with Ethereum, obviously they're similar in the fact that futures already trade, right? And they're similar in the fact that these are the two largest blockchains that some people look at as commodities. And I wonder if there's another piece that maybe does make Ethereum unique in the sense of all the technological pieces that you just said. At the same time, though, people are building on Bitcoin in very much the same way with NFTs, ordinals, and everything else we're seeing now. So I don't know how different they are when you actually put them together in the eyes of a regulator who might be sitting there and saying, go, not go in May.
Yeah, I think that's right. The element of staking and those things are added complications around ETH. The SEC's refusal to say unequivocally that it's a non-security commodity is a differentiating factor. And then, I wouldn't overlook that the staff spent 10 years evaluating Bitcoin ETFs and thinking about Bitcoin and investigating Bitcoin. And they're just processes that take some time. So I agree in the sense that they look similar on the outside, and I actually agree on the sense that we will get there in relative short order. I think we've moved into the ETF era, but you just may have to give it some time, right? You may have to give it some time. They may want to poke the edges for more months than we have until this approval, or I could be wrong. I think that would be great. One thing we have learned from the Bitcoin ETF launch, which is unequivocal, is that these products work. They're working flawlessly. They've dramatically lowered costs for American investors. They've made things safer for American investors. They've probably curtailed interest in offshore activity and less reputable activity. So we've learned that they've been a big win. That should help too, because we would see the same thing in ETH. That won't be the only thing the SEC focuses on, but that benefit to American investors is sort of unequivocal at this point. And
I mean, it's hard to deny that, and it's also hard to deny how smoothly I think things have gone in the early day trading of Bitcoin ETFs. And again, shout out to you and the team for the role you've been playing in that. And I guess there were predictions that were very off, Matt, when we look at kind of how this year would have gone after they got approved. As you said, this has been going way quicker than I think a lot of people expected. I'm curious, looking ahead now to the rest of the year, given all of that, what are your bold calls, I guess, for where we end up, just given how fast this has all moved? And where do you think the market's wrong and continues to be wrong when you look ahead this year?
Yeah, look, I think we're going to all-time highs on Bitcoin for sure, and not just a little bit above. I think we're going, meaningfully above. Sometimes investing is complex and sometimes it's simple. In this case, I think it's relatively simple, right? Bitcoin's price is set by supply and demand. We have a massive new source of demand. And in April, we're going to have reduced new supply. And sometimes that simple math is all that you need. So I think the market is still underestimating the importance of these ETFs. They haven't unlocked the full spectrum of potential investors into the space. Those investors take time. So I think the market is probably still not optimistic enough on this. And yeah, I think that's where we're going. Now, I could be wrong, of course. Bitcoin is very volatile. There are a lot of exogenous factors. But when you look at it from that simple supply-demand perspective, it's hard to be anything but bullish.
I think it's a great way to wrap this one up here, Matt. I can't say anything that I can't disagree with any of that. It's just been fascinating to watch all of this play out in real time. And again, we're kind of in the same camp on a lot of those things, and we'll see what happens come May. But would love to have you back on the show before that happens. So thank you again for coming on Coinage. It was good to chat with you again. The CIO there at Bitwise, Matt Hogan. Thanks again, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
That's gonna do it. That's gonna do it for us on this edition of Coinage. As we wrap things up, again, huge announcement, by the way. We haven't said anything about this, Andre, and I like teasing it just with that.
A little bit of alpha on the show.
Huge alpha coming at Coinage.media tomorrow. Stay tuned for a big announcement from us, and stay tuned for ETH Denver coverage. Andre and I are going to be out there. If you see us out there, hit us up. Stop us, say hi. If you're in the community, stay tuned. A lot of big updates coming for you. For Andre, for myself, for everybody here at Coinage, thank you again for listening.
See us in Denver.
We'll see you in Denver.
See ya.